Paul Waldau, so good to see you. You've done a lot of work in animal studies, and right now you're directing a program at Canisius College in Buffalo. You're teaching a course on animal law for 10 years at Harvard Law School. And some of this began with us in the religion and ecology work, and especially in the wonderful conference that you organized with Kimberly Patton on religion and animals at Harvard. And a magnificent book came out of that, A Communion of Subjects. Can you give us a feel for that conference and what all was happening there at Harvard with religion and animals?
The conference took place in 1996. It had great energy, in part because it was a follow-up on the religion and ecology conferences, which had generated so much interest, and this was a focusing of that energy in a special way on the animal question. And we had scholars from all over the world, but it was wonderful because there were different kinds of scholars, not only different traditions, but some science-focused scholars and some religion-focused scholars, getting them in dialogue in using the theme that Thomas Berry gave us, which became the title of the book, worked so well that I think there were personal connections besides the sort of ideas connection. So when the conference finished after 3 or 4 days, I think everybody was elated, and then the book came out, and it took a lot of editing. It was about 6 years later, but it's produced a product that offers a really nice overview of the diversity, but the common interest that people have in how we relate to the other living beings on the earth.
Yes, and that combination was so unusual, wasn't it? Animal behaviorists and scientists and the Humane Society of the U.S. and Betty Lawrence, a veterinarian, and so on. And there was a wonderful person, Ken Shapiro, there. Can you give us a feel for him coming from the science world and being part of this conference and what he said at the end of the conference?
He was interesting because he came in skeptical about religion. I think it was perhaps one of the 2 or 3 most moving events during the conference when he said, after listening to people, and he had noted their goodwill and their energy and how gracious and willing they were to listen to him, and although he came in skeptical, he said, I don't think I realized into this conference that I have a spiritual side to myself. And so you could see him acknowledge how broad the notion of spiritual was and how helpful it was to even a hard-boiled scientist who had been skeptical. At that moment, I think, well, lots of people had already broken through, but it was, I think, representative of how many people could break through. And so all of us were really delighted to have him there and also to experience what he himself had experienced.
Yes. Well, you have a law degree, you have a PhD from Oxford in religion, and you've also worked with the Great Apes Project and Richard Wrangham at Harvard. We visited there one time with Richard Wrangham. That was extraordinary. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Great Apes Project and what's happening?
It started in the 1990s, and it was an effort to offer fundamental protections to the other great apes, gorillas, orangutans, bonobos, and chimpanzees, who were terribly put upon in the wild and in captivity as well. Richard Wrangham is a protege of Jane Goodall, deeply interested not only in the science, of course, he runs a major science program at Harvard, but also in the ethical issues that the religion and ecology and the spirituality issues, those previous conferences had energized all of us, and Richard picked up on the integrity of that. And so in working with Richard and in having the chance to have a dialogue with you and Richard just introduce such remarkable figures to each other, you could see the synergies, the possibilities of people going together in an open-minded way towards the future, just constantly informing each other. And Richard's been a real contributor in many different ways.
Yes. You were working, as I recall, on this notion out of the UN of cultural treasures, and that these are treasures as well, our primate cousins and so on. You've also worked in law on the rights of animals. Can you tell us a little bit about your course at Harvard in the animal law field as it's emerging?
The most exciting thing about that class is are the conversational dynamics, the educational dynamics, you might call them. About 25 students take this course. As interesting as the content is that I prescribe through the syllabus, I think the most important thing that happens is the way people meet and then lean into the course. They find the topics enabling. And with a talented group like that, one of the key things to do is not always lead them where you think they ought to be, but simply to walk with them in a way to get out of their way and let them go where they're going to go with each other. So the educational dynamics are heavy participation, lots of exciting ideas, lots of basic questions, and not just law, but bringing in some of the spirituality, some of the cultural differences, some of the current problems, some of the political issues. That combination of all those different issues makes for great education, and that class has always been an incredibly good learning experience for me as well.
Yes, I can imagine. And we have another mutual friend, Mark Beckhoff, who's done remarkable work in animal behavior and even the culture of animals and so on, and their play. Give us a feel for Mark's work and how it's been so important with the tremendous empathy he has with what he's studying.
Mark was at the 1996 conference and did a presentation. He has a deep spiritual side to him, but he's a respected scientist and emeritus professor at University of Colorado now. His big emphasis has been on, at first, play in other animals, and then emotions. And he provides the scaffolding, as it were, the scientific evidence, the rigorous, careful analysis of play and of the physical basis for these high-level abilities in other living beings. But I think what's most fun about Mark is Mark does a great deal of media, he teaches widely, he is so in sympathy with what some of the great world religious traditions and indigenous traditions have seen are connections to other living beings. He intuitively knows that, and he brings the science basis for it. And it's another good exemplification of how different fields can, working together, each see further.
Yes. Now, what about Franz de Waal, who's actually saying there's culture and morality, perhaps, in the more than human world, in the animal world? What's your understanding of that?
He's been studying primates at the Yerkes Institute in Emory for quite some time, and he gets to observe them, and he works mostly with bonobos, very, very intelligent, interesting social species. And his observations are that these animals have interactions with each other that if you will watch carefully, just take the time to notice, take them seriously, you'll start to see social interactions that show what he sometimes calls proto-morality, all the building blocks of caring about others, reciprocating, having rules, and if you break the rules, suffering the consequences. So the social group is his focus, but individuals working within it and showing that their great intelligence, their care for each other, their alliances are rich, and if we will explore them, take them seriously, we'll find out that there are some, what you have called, multiple intelligences in the world. There are many different kinds of intelligences that can work together and be seen by each other.
And so the animal behaviors are helping us to see that there's empathy and sympathy and interrelationship in the elephant world, in many of the fish, the birds, the interactions. Can you give us a sense of this sense of sympathy, for example, between other animals?
Well, there are so many interesting non-human animals out there, groups, and in their social gatherings, how they interact with each other must be observed in their individual cases. But if you will take the time to do this, you'll find, and scientists do this quite well on an individual basis, you'll find that crows and ravens, dolphins, orangutans, gorillas, so many different kinds of animals show extraordinary social skills, individuality, personality, all working in this interesting architecture back and forth to build their community. And it helps us recognize that we're really not alone on the earth, that we are remarkable, but we can use our considerable abilities to notice the other living beings and notice they too can be quite remarkable.
And this multiple intelligences, I've always been fascinated by migrations of turtles and birds and the caribou. And I asked Doug Candlin once at Bucknell, do we really understand these? And he was saying we don't fully understand them. What's your sense of, I know there's a variety of migrations, but bird migrations, do we understand them?
No. I think what we understand is they give us a sense of wonder, if you will notice them. I think one of the great tragedies is so many people are educated away from noticing them, but those of us who have, educated by other cultures that have done that much better than we have, begin to recognize that the world is full of mystery in the most beautiful sense, and wonder, and that awe is such an appropriate response to differences. My personal sense is that when we are at our humblest, we can understand some rather interesting things. We may not understand it all, but we can understand that they are remarkable in context, and that if we will respect that, our lives will be all the richer for it.
Yes. One of the people we, of course, greatly admire is Jane Goodall, who has this deep empathy herself. But what I'm struck by, and love to ask you, is it seems as though that sense of comprehensive compassion, empathy, identity with the more than human world, I think is really emerging in our times. People who are trying to save species or help the turtles in their nesting period and so on, that there's something that's saying we are part of this living interaction with other species. Would you say that's growing?
Oh, dramatically. And growing not just from the standpoint of the leaders in societies directing people to do this, but growing from the grassroots. People noticing in their backyards, in their local ecosystems, in the reserves near their homes, and in wild spaces. There are lots of complex things going on that we haven't been trained to notice particularly well, but when we take the time to notice it, we begin to see that the tapestry is extremely rich and beautiful. And so the migrations coming across where we live, the native mammals just out in our local area are so, the birds of course, the individual birds in those local areas, are so fascinating to watch. And when we recognize that they can be our neighbors, not just can be, but are our neighbors, our community becomes, what Thomas Berry so rightly called, our larger community that really is part of ourselves, and we can't really be truly ourselves without it.
Yes, this communion of subjects, not a
Yes.
collection of objects.
Yes.
Well, Paul, thank you for your enormous contributions in teaching and writing and research and lecturing and in convening as well the Religion and Animals group at the American Academy of Religion. You've been such a leader in this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.